I never imagined I'd be the one to unravel humanity's greatest mystery, or perhaps the one who would accidentally usher in its end. My name is Dr. Evelyn Reeves. I'm 31 years old, a NASA astronaut and an exobiologist. 4 years ago, I embarked on a mission that would shatter everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos. I used to believe that knowledge above all else would save us, that science, reason, and discovery were the ultimate safeguards against the unknown. But that was before I found the signal, before Pioneer 10 made contact. It was supposed to be an ancient relic by now, lost in the deep recesses of space, a piece of history that no one would ever truly comprehend. After all, Pioneer 10 had been launched in 1972. Over 50 years had passed since the probe was sent out of the solar system, tasked with exploring Jupiter and then continuing its journey beyond the edges of our knowledge. The mission was considered a success, but soon it faded into the background. NASA had long since considered it a lost cause. There were no more communications, no signals. The probe had drifted into the abyss, beyond reach, beyond relevance. But it wasn't gone. No, Pioneer 10 was very much alive. It started with a simple anomaly, an odd signal that made its way across my desk one quiet night during my shift. It wasn't uncommon for us to pick up strange transmissions from deep space, cosmic rays, solar flares, the occasional satellite interference. Most of the time, we'd dismiss these as nothing more than background noise. But this one was different. I was alone in the command center when the first faint pulse appeared on the monitors. I didn't think much of it at first, just a random glitch or a distorted data stream. But then, as I adjusted the parameters and zoomed in on the signal, something became clear. This was not a natural anomaly. It was deliberate, rhythmic, structured. As a scientist, I knew the difference between random noise and intentional communication. And this was an attempt to speak. But who or what was sending it? And why now? I ran it through every diagnostic tool I had access to. I cross-checked the readings. I made sure nothing was misaligned, but the results were unshakable. The signal was real, and it was coming from Pioneer 10. It didn't make sense. The probe had been silent for over 5 decades. It should have been long past the point of sending anything back to Earth. Yet here we were, receiving clear, steady pulses from the very spacecraft that had supposedly drifted into the void. At first, I thought it was a glitch in the system. Maybe someone had hacked into our data feed. But no, it wasn't a malfunction. I checked and rechecked the source. It was unmistakably Pioneer 10. I immediately alerted my superior, Dr. Karen Bellamy. She was the head of the exobiology department and, in my mind, the sharpest mind at NASA. But when I told her what I had found, she was skeptical. "That's impossible, Evelyn," she said, her voice clipped. "The probe was never designed to transmit data beyond its power limit. It's been dead for years." "I know what it sounds like," I replied, feeling the weight of the discovery pressing down on me. "But the signal, it's too organized. It's structured in a way that doesn't fit the patterns of space radiation or natural interference." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, and then she said, "I'll need to see the data." I uploaded everything I had to the server and waited. My heart was pounding as I stared at the signal, still pulsing steadily in the background. It wasn't just a single burst. It was a sequence, a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there trying to reach us. I hadn't expected her to take it seriously. But a few minutes later, Dr. Bellamy called back, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. This can't be right," she said. "This signal. Evelyn, this is unlike anything we've ever encountered before. I need you to send the full analysis to me immediately. I'm coming down there." By the time she arrived, I had already run the signal through every possible algorithm, every program designed to detect patterns. Nothing came close to what I was seeing. The pulses were too regular, too precise, and there was a deeper resonance beneath the surface. It wasn't just information. It felt alive. When Dr. Bellamy walked into the control room, she was pale. I could see it in her eyes, the same mix of awe and fear that was building in me. She stood next to me, staring at the monitor where the signal continued to pulse, rhythmic and steady. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "This shouldn't be happening." "But it is." She stepped back, rubbing her forehead. "Get me the frequency data," she ordered, her tone hardening with authority. I complied, pulling up the detailed breakdown of the pulses. She scanned the readings in silence, and then I saw it. Her face went ashen, her eyes widening in shock. "This is impossible," she murmured. "What is it?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. "The frequency," she said slowly. "It's too perfect. It's not a malfunction. This is an artificial signal. It's being sent by something intelligent." I froze. "By what?" "I don't know yet," Dr. Bellamy replied, staring at the screen as if she was seeing something that made her question everything she thought she knew. "But we need to verify it. We need to find out what's really going on." We spent the next few hours working together, sifting through data and reanalyzing every detail. By the time dawn broke over the horizon, we had come to a horrifying conclusion. The signal wasn't just from Pioneer 10, it was coming from inside the probe. Somehow the probe had turned on again. But not like before. No, something had changed. Something had altered the probe's programming, its very core function. It had begun transmitting again, and the message it was sending wasn't anything we had ever expected. In fact, it wasn't anything human at all. The signal wasn't a scientific message. It wasn't a cry for help. No, it was a warning, a message meant for someone or something out there. You'd think that would be enough, wouldn't you? It wasn't. As I sat there staring at the readouts, my mind raced with possibilities. What could it mean? What had happened to Pioneer 10 out there, drifting alone for decades? Had it encountered something? Had it been changed? Corrupted by something we couldn't understand? My breath caught in my throat as I saw something that made the blood drain from my face. A secondary transmission had started. This one wasn't a pulse. It was a series of distorted sounds, strange alien noises, like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. They were faint at first, but they grew louder, more insistent, like an invitation or a warning. I tried to filter the noise through every decoder we had at our disposal. Hard to believe. Just wait. It was unrecognizable, indecipherable. But one thing was clear. This wasn't an ordinary transmission. There was a message hidden in the noise. I just couldn't decipher it. Then the lights in the control room flickered. That was when I realized this wasn't just a signal from Pioneer 10. The probe wasn't alone. I don't know how, but somehow the transmission had reached us. Somehow, whatever had hijacked Pioneer 10 had found a way to connect to Earth, to us. The question now wasn't what it was, but what it wanted. But that was only the beginning. I had no idea that what we were about to uncover would change everything we knew about life in the universe and our place within it. The next transmission, the one that followed after the flickering lights, came through clear and unmistakable. It was a voice, low, guttural, and ancient. And it wasn't human. That was the moment when I understood. This wasn't a scientific anomaly. This wasn't just some fluke of space-time. We had made contact, and the message was not from the stars. It was from a place far darker, a place we were never meant to know about, and we had just awakened it. We should have been prepared for what happened next. But how could we have known? How could we have ever anticipated the storm of chaos that would follow the discovery of Pioneer 10's transmission? It wasn't just an anomaly or some distant signal we could study and discard like every other cosmic oddity. It was an awakening. And the moment that message came through, everything changed. The voice was wrong. It sounded like a broken, tortured growl, like something from the deepest, most forgotten corners of the universe. I had to fight the instinct to turn off the monitors, to shut everything down and pretend none of this was happening. But Dr. Bellamy was already staring at the screen, transfixed. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, as if afraid to break the silence that had descended in the room. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what to say. The noise, the voice. It wasn't even speaking in any known language. It was a series of dissonant, guttural sounds, layered over each other in an unnatural rhythm. And yet somehow it felt purposeful. The rhythm pulsed through me, like a heartbeat I could almost feel in my chest. It was close, closer than I could explain. The worst part wasn't even the voice itself. It was the feeling it left behind. A deep, gnawing sense of unease, like we were being watched, as if the very walls around us had ears, eyes. The longer I listened, the more I felt like I was being pulled into the void. I pulled my hands away from the controls and looked over at Dr. Bellamy. Her expression mirrored my own, though hers was less of confusion and more of an increasing dread. I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. What have we done? Is there a way to shut it down? I asked, though I knew the answer. Dr. Bellamy didn't respond immediately. She was staring at the screen, her fingers hovering above the keyboard, unsure of what action to take. The signal kept pulsing, a steady rhythm that was starting to feel like a countdown. I don't think we can, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's not coming from the probe's original systems anymore. Whatever's transmitting this, it's not something we designed. It's altered. Altered. The word sent a chill down my spine. Altered was an understatement. Pioneer 10 had been alone in the void for over 50 years. It had drifted far beyond our reach, beyond our knowledge. But something had found it. Something had changed it. But there was more. A shift in the signal, something subtle at first, caught my attention. I leaned in closer to the monitor, trying to catch every nuance. The dissonance in the voice had changed. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was intentional. There was a pattern hidden beneath the chaos, like a code waiting to be cracked. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Dr. Bellamy was already typing furiously, running diagnostics on the signal, trying to pull out anything useful. But the more we analyzed, the more impossible it seemed to understand. This wasn't just an alien message. This was something that had come to us, to Earth, in a way we didn't fully comprehend. We need to get this to the higher-ups, Dr. Bellamy said, her voice tight with both urgency and uncertainty. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, but it might also be a threat. A threat? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt heavy in my mouth. From who? Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear behind them. I don't know, but I'm not sure we're the ones they want to talk to. It didn't take long for things to escalate. Within hours, we had gathered a small team of scientists and engineers to analyze the signal further. A few higher-ranking officials had been notified, though they were cautious, uncertain about what to do. Everyone agreed that we needed to keep the discovery under wraps for now, but the sense of dread in the air was palpable. Everyone knew this was something unprecedented, something dangerous. The signal had changed again. It was no longer just static, no longer just noise or meaningless sounds. It had formed into a recognizable pattern, a series of intervals, pauses, and then something that could almost be described as words. Though they were incomprehensible to us, they were clearly not random. There was intent behind them. There was meaning. At first, the higher-ups were skeptical. This could just be another cosmic anomaly, they insisted. Maybe some stray radiation or malfunction in the probe systems. But we all knew better now. By the time Dr. Bellamy and I were joined by the rest of the team, things had only grown worse. The signal was becoming more persistent. It didn't fade, didn't stop. It continued to pound against the fabric of our reality, like a hammer striking an anvil, echoing into the silence of the universe. It was then, in the midst of our frantic analysis, that the first transmission arrived. It came not as a pulse, not as a voice, but as a single, chilling phrase. We didn't understand the words, but the feeling, the overwhelming wrongness of it, was undeniable. Help us. That was all it said. The voice, if it could even be called that, spoke again. And this time I understood the horror behind the words. Not alone. I felt my stomach drop. What was it? Who was it? What had Pioneer 10 encountered out there? The room was quiet, but the tension was thick enough to choke us all. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of the scientists, each of them pale, wide-eyed, and silent. No one spoke for a long time, as if we were all waiting for someone to explain what was happening. And then, as if to confirm the nightmare we had all been dreading, the transmission shifted once again. This time the words were clear and they were chilling. "We are waiting for you." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. For the first time since we'd found the signal, I felt a ripple of panic shoot through me. I stood up suddenly, feeling like the walls were closing in. The words felt alive now, as if they were directed at me, pulling me into something far bigger than I was prepared to face. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I stared at the monitor, something caught my eye. The readings. Something was changing. The coordinates, the spatial data, the position of Pioneer 10, it was moving. The probe had moved. Not in the way a drifting satellite would. No, Pioneer 10 was heading somewhere. It had been heading somewhere all along. It wasn't just floating through space, lost and forgotten. It was on course. A course that had been set decades ago, maybe even before we knew it was possible. I glanced at Dr. Bellamy, and I saw the realization dawning on her face, just as it had on mine. "Evelyn, it's headed towards something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I think it's on a collision course." A collision course with what? Where had Pioneer 10 been this whole time? What had it found? We both turned back to the monitors, and that was when the final piece fell into place. The probe's trajectory was fixed. It was no longer aimless. The signals, the whispers, the strange language, it was all leading us towards something, pulling us into its orbit. But the destination wasn't Earth. It wasn't even within the solar system anymore. Pioneer 10 was heading towards an alien planet. It was already too late to stop it. We didn't know how much time we had left. That was the first thing I realized. In the days following the discovery that Pioneer 10 had changed course, we scrambled to piece together what little data we could. We were no longer dealing with a simple communication anomaly. What had started as a series of strange pulses had now turned into something much darker. The probe was moving towards an unknown planet in deep space, and it was moving fast. By the time Dr. Bellamy and I had analyzed the trajectory, we were no longer sure if Pioneer 10 had even been drifting alone all these years. The transmission wasn't just a message from some far-off intelligence. It was a call, a summons. Whoever or whatever was out there had been waiting for the probe, and now it was headed straight for them. And let me tell you, the last thing we expected was that we might be the ones answering the call. Every calculation, every piece of data we ran confirmed the same thing. Pioneer 10 was on a crash course with a planet. It wasn't slowing down. In fact, it seemed to be accelerating, as though it were being pulled by an unseen force, guiding it towards its final destination. My team worked day and night, trying to figure out how we could intervene. Could we send a command to the probe to redirect its path? Could we pull it out of its trajectory before it collided with the planet? But the truth became apparent quickly. Pioneer 10 was no longer responding to any of our signals. Whatever was happening to it, whatever had taken control, was beyond our ability to stop. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The vastness of space had always seemed infinite, unknowable, and safe in its cold emptiness. But now it felt like we had opened a door we were never meant to find. And whatever was on the other side, whatever had claimed Pioneer 10, was coming for us. We knew the planet was coming, but nothing could prepare us for the sight of it. The surface was dark, twisted, like something out of a nightmare. It was too far away to be visible through ordinary telescopes, but the long-range scans we'd been running had finally started to pick up more details. It wasn't a gas giant like some of the other planets in distant star systems. This one had a surface, rocky and jagged, with deep craters and ominous ridgelines that seemed to carve through the planet's crust. No signs of life, no signs of anything we could recognize as natural. It felt like the kind of place you'd expect to find in a horror movie. And trust me, at that point, none of us were looking for a sequel. There were no oceans, no forests, no clouds. It was an apocalyptic world, a place that had seen eons of devastation, the kind of planet you would expect to find in the heart of a dying star system. Dr. Bellamy stood next to me, her face as pale as mine. The room was filled with a dozen other scientists, engineers, and military personnel, but none of us could tear our eyes away from the monitor. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. This is not a natural planet." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. There was something deeply wrong about it, something that made my skin crawl. It felt alien, in a way that went beyond simple biology or chemistry. The planet didn't just look foreign, it looked wrong, like it had been shaped or corrupted by something far beyond our comprehension. And then we saw it, a flicker of movement, a brief flash across the planet's surface, followed by a series of dark, shifting lines, almost like shadows that moved on their own. They didn't match any natural phenomenon we knew. They were too purposeful, too deliberate. "We need to get a closer look," one of the engineers said, breaking the tense silence. "Can we send a probe, something to get more data?" I shook my head, trying to suppress the growing sense of dread that was gnawing at me. "The probe's not responding to any commands. It's on its own course now." Dr. Bellamy's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward. Could this be related to the signal? To the message we received? I didn't answer at first. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to believe that the message was just a product of some cosmic interference, some freak event. But another part of me, the part that had been awake for days, the part that had been studying Pioneer 10's transmission patterns, couldn't deny it. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is connected. It's been calling to us. And now it's here." I stared at the monitor, my eyes focused on the planet that was now looming ever closer in the calculations. It was no longer just a distant speck on the screen. It was real. It was coming into focus. And then, like a punch to the gut, the worst possible thing happened. The transmission changed again. It wasn't the same dissonant growl, nor the unintelligible whispers. No, this time the voice was clearer. It was louder, stronger. But it was not speaking in any language we understood. It was speaking in something far more ancient, far more primal. A series of deep, rumbling tones reverberated through the command center, shaking the room, vibrating the very air. I could feel it in my bones. My heart pounded in response, as though the sound was calling to me personally. And then I saw it, on the screen, overlaid across the planet's surface, faint but growing clearer by the second. A series of geometric patterns, symbols, shapes. They didn't make sense. They weren't from any language I had ever seen, not in any earthly culture, not even from the advanced alien scripts we had studied during my career in exobiology. This was something else, something older. The symbols danced across the screen, moving like an animated sequence, one after the other. They seemed to pulse in time with the voice. Each time the tone of the voice changed, the symbols shifted, rearranged, and then settled into new configurations, as if they were spelling out something. The room grew quiet. No one dared to speak. We were all watching in horror, entranced by the signal, unable to look away. It felt like an ancient being was slowly revealing itself to us, unraveling its deepest secrets. A soft beep from my terminal broke the silence, and I looked down to see the computer's translation software starting to work overtime. The symbols were beginning to resolve themselves. My heart skipped a beat. Could we be on the verge of deciphering this? Could this be the breakthrough we needed? I typed in the command to isolate the most frequent patterns, and within seconds the computer began to translate. The symbols didn't form any readable words in any language I recognized, but the patterns were oddly familiar. They resembled a combination of hieroglyphics and sacred geometry, something ancient and long forgotten. And then, through the haze of fear and confusion, I saw the first clear message come through. It wasn't a word. It was a symbol, a single, horrifying symbol that filled the entire screen, a circle, an eye, and below it, the message, "We are watching. You are next." The room went deathly silent. No one moved. No one spoke. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, suffocating me. The fear that had been creeping in for days was now a choking grip around my throat. I turned to look at Dr. Bellamy, but her face was just as pale as mine. She knew as well as I did that this wasn't just some message of contact. This wasn't a peaceful gesture. This wasn't an invitation to learn or share knowledge. This was a threat. "We need to get this to the higher-ups," Dr. Bellamy said, her voice shaking. "We need to inform the entire agency. This is bigger than us." But as she spoke, a new realization hit me. The words on the screen, the symbols, the very tone of the voice we had heard. It wasn't just calling to us from the depths of space, it was waiting. We weren't the ones being chosen. We weren't being invited to join some higher order. We were being hunted. The planets aligned in my mind as I stared at the symbols, trying to make sense of it all. Pioneer 10 had encountered something out there, something beyond our understanding. And now that same something was coming here, to Earth, to us. But there was one thing I knew for certain. Whatever it was, we were no longer the ones in control. And the universe had just changed. We should have been prepared, but we weren't. We were too late. When the signal changed again, it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't even a warning. It was something else, something personal. For days, we had been trying to decode the symbols and patterns, looking for a message, a clue, something that could give us some sense of control. But every time we thought we had a breakthrough, every time we managed to scrape together a fraction of meaning, the transmission would twist itself into a new, even more disturbing form. The message wasn't coming to us from some distant civilization. It was coming from inside our reality. And it was growing stronger, like a slow, inevitable tide that was about to swallow us whole. That afternoon, as I sat in front of the screen, my eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, I felt a strange tingling sensation running through me, like static electricity in the air. The room was unusually quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence you feel when you know something is about to break. And then it did. The transmission flickered once more, and this time, I couldn't breathe. The voice, it wasn't the same growl or whisper. No, it was clear, perfectly articulate, almost soothing in its cadence. Too soothing, and it was speaking directly to us, to me. It spoke in my language. "We see you, Dr. Reeves." My blood froze. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen on the keyboard. The words echoed through my mind, louder than the sound of my own heartbeat. I wasn't sure whether I should be terrified or amazed, but I felt a cold dread crawl through my veins. How could it know my name? How could it possibly know I was the one sitting here, analyzing the data? How could it know anything about me? But there was no time to think. The message wasn't done. "You are closer than you think." I shook my head. It didn't make sense. I looked around the room at Dr. Bellamy, who was now standing next to me, her eyes wide and fixed on the screen. I could see the terror on her face, the same terror I felt creeping up my spine. But there was something else too, something that unsettled me even more, a feeling of recognition. Like I had heard those words before, "closer than you think." Before I could process it, the screen flickered again, and the voice spoke once more, this time even clearer than before. Each word seemed to resonate deep inside my chest. "The door is open. The end is near." I felt my stomach lurch as the words hit me like a physical blow. I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone dry. I glanced back at Dr. Bellamy, who looked pale, almost sick. She had her hand pressed to her mouth, as though trying to stop herself from vomiting. I turned back to the screen, frantically typing commands to analyze the voice, to trace its origin, but the data was shifting too quickly. It was no longer coming from Pioneer 10. It was coming from inside the ship, from somewhere deeper, somewhere hidden. The transmission had changed. The connection had crossed some threshold, but it wasn't just a signal anymore. The screen before me warped, and I blinked as if trying to clear my vision. The lines on the display, which had once been the calculated readings of the probe's final trajectory, now twisted and morphed into something else. Patterns, strange geometric shapes that pulsated like they were alive. And then something more terrifying happened. The shapes broke apart. They formed into a face. A face. It was faint at first, as though it were something you would see out of the corner of your eye, a shadow or a reflection that disappears when you look directly at it. But this was there, clear as day. The face stared back at me, cold and alien, its features stretching in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. Its eyes were hollow, and there was something about the expression, something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't human, it was ancient, and it was watching me. It took every ounce of my will to tear my eyes away from the screen. My heart raced, my breath shallow, as if I had just seen something I wasn't meant to. But I couldn't stop. The face had embedded itself into my mind. It was as though it had taken root in my very thoughts. It was still there, staring at me, even when I closed my eyes. Wild, huh? But things only got more intense. What is that? Dr. Bellamy's voice trembled beside me. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. I could feel the cold touch of that face creeping along the edges of my thoughts. But I couldn't help it. I had to look back. And when I did, the face had changed. It was no longer still. The mouth was moving, opening and closing, though no sound came from it. Instead, the symbols, the ones we had seen before, flooded the screen, surrounding the face like some kind of warped halo. The symbols twisted in ways I couldn't follow, pulling me deeper into a web I could no longer escape. Then, without warning, the face distorted, stretching wider, its features merging and splitting until it seemed to consume the entire screen. And suddenly I felt a pressure in my head, like something was forcing its way inside. I gasped for air, but it was as though I couldn't breathe anymore. The walls of the room seemed to close in around me, and the cold feeling of recognition grew stronger. I realized then, with a sickening clarity, that the face wasn't just a face. It was something, someone reaching out to me. In that moment, I knew we had crossed some invisible line. The signal from Pioneer 10 had led us here, to this point of no return. We had opened the door. We had invited them in. Dr. Bellamy was backing away now, her face as white as a ghost. "No, no, no," she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. I could hardly hear her. I could hardly think. The voice, it, was speaking again. "You are not alone." The words vibrated through me, shaking my bones. And then, suddenly, there was a sound. Not a voice, but something mechanical, like the clicking of gears turning, the grinding of metal against metal. And it wasn't coming from the screen. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. It was coming from somewhere within the ship, from deeper in the corridors. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Dr. Bellamy's eyes widened in terror as the noise grew louder, more distinct, like something was moving. Something was coming for us. The ship, our ship, was alive. I grabbed Dr. Bellamy's arm. "We need to get to the control room, now." We didn't wait for any further confirmation. We didn't need to. Whatever had taken hold of the probe, whatever had been manipulating its signal, was now inside the ship. The walls, the machinery, everything felt wrong. The air felt thick with static, charged with a presence that was everywhere. We ran down the narrow hallway, our footsteps echoing in the silence. But the further we moved, the more the ship seemed to shift. The walls creaked and groaned as though something beneath the metal was moving, stretching, warping. I looked back, but there was nothing there. No one. Just empty corridors, stretching endlessly into the darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. And then, in the distance, we heard it. A low, guttural growl. It came from the control room. A sound that wasn't human. A sound that wasn't anything we had ever heard before. We stopped dead in our tracks. For a moment, we were frozen, the air thick with fear. Then the door to the control room hissed open. The growl grew louder, more insistent. And through the crack in the door, I saw it, the face. But it wasn't just on the screen anymore. It was standing right there. I couldn't breathe. I could barely move. The air in the control room was thick, as if it had changed its very substance, becoming something oppressive, suffocating. The growl, that strange and inhuman sound, still reverberated through the walls, but it wasn't coming from the screens anymore. It was inside the room, vibrating the floor beneath my boots, rattling the very atoms of the space we were in. The ship had transformed. Dr. Bellamy stood beside me, her face drained of color. Her hands trembled, fingers brushing against the cold steel of the control panel. I wanted to tell her to run, to get out, but my voice had failed me. Something in my chest constricted, some primal instinct telling me that whatever was in this room wasn't something we could outrun. And then it appeared. The figure in front of the console wasn't human, not by any stretch of the imagination. It was otherworldly. The way it stood there, unmoving, under the pale light of the flickering monitors, made the space around it seem like a warped reflection of reality. Its form wasn't solid, not in the way we understood solidity. There was a fluidity to it, as though its body was simultaneously there and not there. It flickered like a malfunctioning hologram, with edges that bled into the darkness behind it. At first I thought it might have been a trick of the light, a malfunction of the ship's systems, but no, it was alive. The growls ceased the moment we entered, replaced by an overwhelming silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. My heart pounded in my chest. My body was frozen, caught between the need to run and the pull of something I couldn't resist. The creature's head turned slowly, its gaze shifting from the control panel to us. Even though it didn't have a face as we understood it, no mouth, no eyes, no nose, the feeling of being seen was unmistakable. Its presence consumed the room. Dr. Bellamy gasped, a soft sound of horror escaping her lips. I wanted to speak, to do anything, but the words caught in my throat. Something in the air, in the very presence of the figure, choked the sound before it could leave my mouth. And then the figure did something that made my stomach drop. It moved, its limbs shifted unnaturally, like a marionette with invisible strings being tugged by something far beyond our comprehension. There was no noise, no sound of muscle and bone moving. It just moved, gliding forward with an eerie fluidity that made my blood run cold. It didn't walk as a human did. It hovered, the space around it warping and bending, as though reality itself was being stretched to accommodate its form. "Evelyn," Dr. Bellamy whispered, her voice fragile. What is that?" I couldn't answer her. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I was seeing, what was happening, but my brain refused to make sense of it. Every time I tried to focus on the creature, its form seemed to shift, as if it were simultaneously multiple things at once. An array of impossible shapes that made no sense. It was like trying to focus on a mirror that distorted everything reflected in it, no matter how hard you stared. I took a step back, but my legs felt weak, as though my own body didn't want to obey me. It was like the ship itself was pushing me forward, guiding me toward it. My thoughts, my control, were slipping away from me. The creature's head tilted slightly to the side, and I felt something cold ripple through the room. It was like the very air had become a physical barrier, thickening around us, making every breath feel laborious, strained. It didn't move its mouth, but I heard it anyway. "You have come too far." The voice wasn't a sound. It was a vibration, a hum that pierced my mind, thrumming through my bones. My hands began to shake, a feeling of dread flooding through me so deeply I could taste it, bitter and metallic on my tongue. The voice seemed to reverberate, not in the room but inside my head, as though the words were etched into the very fabric of my thoughts. I wanted to scream, to beg for answers, but my lips wouldn't move. My heart hammered louder than my thoughts, the oppressive weight of the creature's presence nearly overwhelming me. Dr. Bellamy's eyes darted from the figure to me, and then back again, her expression filled with confusion and terror. I wanted to say something to her, but the words never came. The silence in the room pressed down, wrapping around us like a heavy, invisible blanket. I forced myself to speak, my voice hoarse and shaky. "What are you?" The question felt stupid the moment it left my lips. I already knew the answer. It wasn't a what, it was a who. Or maybe it wasn't even that. It was something far more terrifying, something that could not be understood in human terms. The creature didn't respond right away. It didn't need to. The longer it stayed there, the more I felt the answer sinking into me. I wasn't sure whether it was the creature itself or the presence of something else that had invaded my mind, but the realization came anyway. It wasn't just here to talk. It wasn't here to communicate in any way we could understand. It had been waiting for us to find the probe, to send our signal, to open the door. And now that door had been opened wide, and we were standing on the threshold of something far more ancient than any human could possibly imagine. The creature's presence was like a weight on my chest, on my very soul. I couldn't tear my gaze away from it, and as I stood there, I began to feel a strange pull toward it, like a moth to a flame. It was so overpowering I could hardly think. My mind was unraveling, the pieces slipping through my fingers. It was like the creature was inside me. No, it wasn't just that. It was more like I was becoming part of it, merging with it, losing myself in the overwhelming tide of its alien consciousness. Its thoughts, if they could even be called thoughts, swarmed in my mind, wrapping around my own, distorting them, folding them into something I couldn't recognize. And then it spoke again. But this time, the words were not a vibration. They were a command. The probe was never lost. It was never abandoned. I felt the air leave my lungs. The weight of those words, the implications, slammed into me with the force of a freight train. The probe, Pioneer 10, hadn't been an accident. It hadn't drifted off course. Number it had been sent. It had been deliberately guided here, and we had followed it. We had followed it blindly, thinking we were making discoveries, but we hadn't been discovering anything. We had been invited. We had opened the door to something ancient, something waiting in the darkness, and now it was too late. The creature took a step closer, its form flickering again, becoming clearer, more defined with each moment. I could feel its presence at the edges of my mind, like 1,000 eyes pressing into my thoughts, seeking to pierce through everything I was. It was searching for something. No, it was trying to take something. I wanted to run. I needed to escape, but my legs refused to move. The ship, the creature, everything felt too real, and yet too alien. I was trapped in the space between reality and nightmare. The figure's hand, no, its limb, extended toward me, fingers stretching unnaturally long. It wasn't like a human hand. It was something else, something that defied the laws of biology, something that felt wrong just by looking at it. It reached for my face, and I could feel the cold pressure building in the room as it did. My mind screamed for me to move, to fight, to do anything. But I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held by something far beyond my understanding. The creature's touch was upon me, and in that moment, it felt as though the ship itself was no longer my world. I wasn't in control of myself anymore. It was as if my very essence was being siphoned away, drawn into the creature's presence. My vision blurred, the edges of reality stretching and bending as though the space around me was dissolving. The room, the ship, everything was becoming an abstraction, a dream, a memory. I could no longer tell where I ended and it began. The voice returned, not in my ears, but in my mind, and the final truth broke through the haze. You are the key, you are the door. It wasn't just the ship that had opened a gateway, it was us. We had opened the door, and now there was no way back. Time seemed to stretch, bending and warping, as though the very fabric of the universe had become a sliver, caught between two realities. The creature's touch, no longer just a physical sensation, was now a presence, an invasion. It wasn't simply on my skin or in my mind. It was me. It was everywhere. I could feel it. In every atom of my being, in every breath, every thought, it crawled its way deeper. The coldness inside me wasn't just a chill. It was the absence of everything I had known to be true. My identity, my memories, the very essence of me, they were slipping away, disintegrating into something unrecognizable. I fought. I had to fight. I felt my body move, my hands reaching for something, anything, to push away the encroaching darkness. But no matter how hard I tried, my fingers couldn't close around anything solid. The air itself seemed to shift, dissolve, and I realized with a sickening jolt that the walls around us weren't just walls anymore. They were alive. The ship had never been just a machine. It had been a vessel, yes, but not a vessel of science, of exploration. No, it was a conduit, a doorway, and we had walked through it. "Bellamy!" I managed to croak, my voice weak and foreign. It felt like it wasn't even mine anymore. She was beside me, but her eyes were vacant, staring at the creature as though she too had begun to merge with it. Her face was pale, slack with the same eerie sense of surrender that had overcome me. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice distant, "we have to let it happen." "No," I gasped, more to myself than to her. "No, this isn't us. This isn't right." But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. It was like I wasn't even arguing against her, but against something far more insidious, a force that was too vast for us to comprehend. The creature, if it could still be called that, loomed before us. Its shape fluctuated, its form constantly shifting, stretching and bending in ways that defied all logic. There was something almost graceful about it, something hypnotic, but it was the kind of grace that only death could possess. It wasn't just alien, it was beyond everything we understood as life. And in its presence, I realized that we weren't the first to open this door. No, humanity was merely the latest in a long line of explorers, too naive to know the risks. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood. This wasn't a simple case of contact gone wrong. This was deliberate. The creatures, whatever they were, had been waiting for us. They had seeded the probe's journey, guided it to us, led us to this point where the boundaries of reality itself were starting to blur. "You were never meant to return," the figure's voice rang out again. But it wasn't just a voice, it was everywhere, inside me, in my thoughts. "The probe. It was always meant to bring you here. This world is not for you. It is for us." I shook my head, struggling to breathe through the pressure building in my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. My thoughts were becoming jumbled, fragmented. The lines between me and the ship, me and the creature, were dissolving. The creature stepped forward, and the very space around it distorted, as though the air itself was bending to its will. It reached toward us again, and this time I didn't flinch. I couldn't. The sensation of it touching my skin wasn't even physical anymore. It was in my soul, a crawling, slithering thing that burrowed deeper with each passing second. "We will return," it said, its voice not in the room but echoing through every corner of my consciousness. "And when we do, you will have unlocked the way for us. We will come, and all will be as it was before." Before? Before what? A blinding pain shot through my skull, as though 1,000 thoughts had collided inside me all at once. But instead of making sense of them, they splintered into a chaotic mess of visions, flashes of alien landscapes, distant stars, and swirling constellations. The creature's presence burrowed deeper, unraveling the fabric of my mind. Then, like the sudden snap of a rubber band, I saw it. The ship wasn't just a tool of exploration. It wasn't just a probe. It was a message, a signal, a vessel of invitation, disguised as an object of scientific curiosity. The probe had been carrying something all along, a key to a much larger puzzle, one that humanity had been meant to solve, even though we hadn't been prepared for the truth of it. And the moment we opened that door, the moment we allowed ourselves to receive the signal from the depths of the cosmos, we had made a choice to open the way for them. We were the gatekeepers, the unwitting heralds of something much older, much more terrifying. The ship, the probe, Pioneer 10, it was never meant to be lost. It was a beacon, drawing us to this very moment. And now that we had answered the call, it was too late to turn back. The creature's form flickered, becoming momentarily sharper, more defined. And in that brief instant, I could see its face, or what passed for its face. It was a mass of shifting tendrils, glistening with what looked like liquid darkness, like oil that couldn't reflect light properly, yet seemed to absorb everything it touched. And in its depths, I saw eyes, thousands of them. No, millions. Thousands upon thousands of tiny gleaming eyes, each one fixated on me, on us, as though they were all watching. And that's when I realized the truth. The creatures weren't just from another planet. They weren't just a different species or an ancient race that had wandered too far into the darkness. They were interdimensional, They existed across realms, spaces between realities, between times, in places that our minds couldn't even fathom. The probe, our probe, hadn't just found them in a distant corner of the universe. It had opened a doorway between worlds. And now that we had touched it, now that we had let it into our reality, it was too late. The ship, our ship, was no longer ours. It was theirs. "We are the first," the creature whispered, its voice like the hiss of 1,000 voices speaking as one. "And you are the last." It was then that I understood. The ship would never return to Earth. There would be no rescue, no return to what we once knew. The Pioneer 10 would become their vessel, their ship, and we would become the first of many, the first of a long line of broken souls who had opened the gate. Bellamy's eyes were distant now, blank. She was gone, her mind already lost to whatever darkness had claimed her. I was left alone in the vast, shifting silence of the room, my body shaking as I realized, too late, that I was already a part of something much larger, much more terrifying, a part of the beginning at the end. The creature's hand reached toward me once more, and this time I didn't fight it. I couldn't. Its fingers, long and insubstantial, hovered over my face. Its cold touch was everywhere now. Inside me. Outside me. It was me. I was it. And then with a final, terrible understanding, I realized the true horror. The universe wasn't just vast and empty. It was waiting.